The blazing June sun beat down mercilessly on Penelope Morgan's back as she clutched her battered copy of Pride and Prejudice to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The stagecoach driver hollered at her to hurry, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the only home she'd ever known, a home where she was no longer welcome. At 22, Penelope had been cast out by her own family, branded a disgrace for prioritizing books over suitable marriage prospects, for daring to dream beyond the boundaries of her father's expectations. "Miss, we ain't got all day," the driver called impatiently. St. Louis is a long journey from Boston. With a shuddering breath, Penelope climbed aboard, her small trunk of possessions mostly filled with cherished books loaded behind her. As the stagecoach lurched forward, she wondered what awaited her in Missouri, where her distant aunt had grudgingly agreed to take her in. "Good riddance," her father had sneered that morning. "Perhaps Aunt Martha can instill some sense into you. A woman who spends all her time reading nonsense has no place in proper society." The memory of his words stung, but Penelope squared her shoulders. She would prove him wrong somehow. She just didn't know how yet. The journey west was arduous and long, spanning weeks of travel by rail and stagecoach. Penelope found solace only in her books, escaping into worlds far more welcoming than her own. When they stopped at inns along the way, she would hide in corners, devouring pages by lamplight until her eyes burned. "You'll ruin your eyesight, miss," one innkeeper's wife had warned. "My eyes are already lost to books," Penelope had replied with a sad smile. "It's my heart that suffers now." By the time the stagecoach rolled into St. Louis in mid-July 1876, Penelope was exhausted. The bustling frontier city was nothing like Boston, rower, younger, filled with the energy of a nation still pushing westward. The air smelled of wood smoke, livestock, and the muddy Mississippi. "This is where you get off, miss," the driver said, helping her down. "Someone meeting you?" Penelope nodded uncertainly. "My Aunt Martha Miller. She owns a boarding house near the edge of town." The driver pointed toward a dusty street. "2 blocks that way, then left. You'll find Miller's boarding house. Can't miss it." With her trunk collected, Penelope made her way through streets teeming with people. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats, women in practical frontier dresses, children darting between wagons and horses. She felt conspicuously Eastern in her travel dress, drawing curious glances. Miller's boarding house was a weathered 2-story structure with a sagging porch and peeling paint. Penelope hesitated at the steps, gathering her courage before knocking. The door swung open to reveal a stern-faced woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled into a severe bun, sharp eyes assessing Penelope like a merchant evaluating questionable goods. "You must be Penelope," she said flatly. "You look like your mother." "Aunt Martha," Penelope greeted, attempting a smile. "Thank you for taking me in." "Don't thank me yet," Martha replied, stepping aside. "Your father's letter made it clear what trouble you've been. I've no patience for idle hands or flights of fancy, girl. Here you'll work for your keep." Penelope followed her aunt inside, heart sinking as she took in the sparse interior. The boarding house smelled of pine soap and old cooking. A few men sat in the common room, playing cards and smoking. "You'll share the room at the end of the hall upstairs," Martha continued. "With my help, Sarah. You'll assist with cleaning, cooking, and laundry. Breakfast at 5, dinner at 6. The rest of your time is for working, not daydreaming." Martha's eyes fell to the book still clutched in Penelope's hands. "And I'll have none of that nonsense. Books rot a woman's brain and give her ideas above her station. Your father said that's what ruined you, and I won't have it continue under my roof." Penelope's grip tightened on her book. "With respect, Aunt Martha, reading is not a sin." Martha's expression hardened. It is when it leads a young woman to reject suitable proposals and embarrass her family. Your father wrote that you've turned down 3 perfectly acceptable matches because you'd rather read than be a proper wife. I'd rather marry for love, Penelope said quietly. Is that so wrong? Love. Martha scoffed. That's the kind of foolishness books put in a girl's head. Marriage is a practical arrangement, not some fairy tale. Now get settled. You start work tomorrow at dawn. That night, Penelope unpacked her precious books, arranging them carefully beneath her narrow bed where they wouldn't be immediately visible. Her roommate, Sarah, a quiet girl of 19 with kind eyes, watched with interest. You sure do love reading, Sarah observed. More than anything, Penelope admitted. These books are all I have left of my old life. Sarah glanced nervously at the door. Mrs. Miller won't like it if she catches you. She burned my one book last year, said it was distracting me from my duties. Penelope felt a chill at these words. I'll be careful, she promised. Life at the boarding house was exactly as Martha had warned, relentless work from dawn until dusk. Penelope scrubbed floors, washed endless piles of linens, and prepared meals for the boarders, mostly single men working at the nearby lumberyards or passing through on their way further west. She stole moments with her books whenever possible, reading by candlelight after Sarah fell asleep, or hiding in the storage cellar during brief breaks. For 2 weeks, she managed to keep her secret, until one evening when Martha discovered her reading Jane Eyre behind the kitchen. What did I tell you? Martha snatched the book from her hands. This nonsense ends now, please, Penelope begged, reaching for the book. It's not hurting anyone. It's hurting you, Martha snapped, filling your head with romantic drivel instead of practical knowledge. No wonder my brother sent you away. That night, Martha collected every book from Penelope's hiding place and locked them in a trunk in her own room. You'll get these back when you leave if you ever learn sense, she declared. Until then, focus on becoming a useful woman instead of a dreamer. Penelope cried herself to sleep, feeling more alone than ever. The following days passed in a gray haze of work and longing. Without her books, she felt like a plant deprived of sunlight, wilting day by day. 2 weeks later, a new boarder arrived. Yates Atwood was unlike the typical men who stayed at Martha's taller, with a quiet confidence and intelligent blue eyes that seemed to take in everything. He wore the practical clothes of a cowboy, worn leather boots, denim trousers, and a faded shirt, but there was something in his bearing that suggested education. At 27, Yates had spent years working cattle drives across Texas and Kansas before deciding to try his hand at something new. He'd come to Missouri to help his uncle with a small ranch just outside St. Louis. Just need a place for a few months until I build my own cabin on the property, he explained to Martha over dinner his first night. Penelope served the meal silently, trying not to stare at the newcomer. There was something compelling about his weathered face and the gentle way he thanked her when she filled his coffee cup. Later that evening, as she collected the dinner plates, she noticed a book peeking from Yates's saddlebag in the corner of the common room. Her heart leapt at the sight, and she couldn't help but pause. "You like Whitman?" Yates asked, catching her staring at his copy of Leaves of Grass. Startled, Penelope nearly dropped the plates. "I've never read him," she admitted softly, "but I love poetry." "You're welcome to borrow it," he offered. Martha's sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Penelope has no time for reading, Mr. Atwood. She has duties to attend to." Yates glanced between them, noting the flush on Penelope's cheeks and the tight line of Martha's mouth. "Of course, madam," he said politely. "Just being neighborly." That night, Penelope lay awake, thinking of the book so tantalizingly close yet forbidden to her. She had recognized the hunger for words in Yates's eyes, a kindred spirit, perhaps. The thought gave her a small spark of hope in the bleakness of her days. Over the next week, Penelope noticed Yates watching her as she worked around the boarding house. Unlike the other men who sometimes made crude remarks or treated her as invisible, he always acknowledged her with a respectful nod or a quiet thank you. Once, when Martha wasn't looking, he slipped her a folded piece of paper. Hiding in the pantry later, she unfolded it to find a poem copied in a neat, strong hand. "A book is a dream that you hold in your hand." Below, he'd written, "The back garden, midnight, I'll bring a lantern." That night, heart pounding, Penelope crept out to the small garden behind the boarding house after Sarah had fallen asleep. True to his word, Yates was waiting with a small covered lantern and her breath caught a book. "I thought you might be missing this," he said softly, handing her a well-worn copy of The Scarlet Letter. Penelope's fingers trembled as she took it. "How did you know?" "I've seen the way you look at my books," he said with a gentle smile. "Like a starving person eyes bread. And your aunt isn't exactly subtle about her opinions on the matter." "She took all my books," Penelope confessed, clutching the novel to her chest. "Said they were ruining me." "Books don't ruin people," Yates replied, sitting on a rough wooden bench. "They save them." In the soft glow of the lantern, Penelope studied his face, the straight nose, strong jaw softened by kind eyes, and hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. "What brought you to St. Louis, Mr. Atwood?" "Yates, please," he corrected. "I spent years driving cattle and sleeping under stars. Got tired of the wandering life. My uncle offered me part of his land if I'd help him manage it. Thought it might be time to put down some roots." "You miss the open trail?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there's something to be said for having a place to call your own." He paused, studying her. "What about you? You don't seem like someone who belongs in a place like this." Penelope laughed softly, without humor. "I don't belong anywhere, it seems. My father sent me away because I refused to marry men I didn't love and spent too much time with books, instead of learning to be a proper society wife." "Sounds like you belong exactly where you choose to be," Yates observed. Their midnight meetings became a secret ritual. Every few nights, Penelope would slip out to the garden where Yates waited with a different book and quiet conversation. He told her about the vast plains of Texas, the cattle drives to Kansas, the characters he'd met along the way. She shared stories of Boston, her dreams of seeing the great libraries of Europe, and her love of Shakespeare and Austen. "My mother taught me to read when I was 4, she confided one night. "Before she died, books became my way of keeping her close. And your father couldn't understand that?" Yates asked. Penelope shook her head. "He remarried quickly. My stepmother wanted me married off even quicker. When I refused the son of my father's business partner, the third suitor I'd rejected, they'd had enough." "Their loss," Yates said simply. "Any man worth having would value a woman's mind, not just her ability to host dinner parties." August melted into September, the nights growing cooler as their friendship deepened. Penelope began to recognize the fluttering in her heart whenever Yates entered a room, the way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched as she served his meals. One evening, as summer surrendered to early autumn, disaster struck. Martha, suspicious of Penelope's improved mood, followed her to the midnight meeting. Her angry shout shattered the peaceful night. "So this is how you repay my charity," she cried, storming into the garden. "Secret rendezvous with a man, and with books no less." Penelope jumped to her feet, the copy of Wuthering Heights falling to the ground. "Aunt Martha, please don't Aunt Martha me," she snapped, grabbing Penelope's arm. "I took you in despite your disgraceful behavior in Boston, and this is how you show gratitude." "Sneaking around with a man at night, Mrs. Miller," Yates stood, his voice calm but firm. We've done nothing wrong. I've simply been lending Miss Morgan some books." "Books?" Martha spat the word like a curse. "The very thing that ruined her in Boston. And you, Mr. Atwood, I expected better from a man who seemed so respectable." She turned to Penelope. "Pack your things. You're leaving tomorrow." "Where am I supposed to go?" Penelope asked, her voice breaking. "That's no longer my concern," Martha replied coldly. "I won't have a disobedient, book-obsessed girl under my roof. You clearly haven't learned your lesson." As Martha dragged her back toward the house, Penelope glanced back at Yates, who stood watching helplessly, his face a mask of concern and anger. True to her word, Martha woke Penelope at dawn. "Out," she ordered, throwing a small bundle of clothing at her. "Your trunk stays until you've paid your debt for room and board these past weeks." "My books," Penelope began, "will remain with me," Martha cut her off. "Consider it payment for the trouble you've caused. Now go, before the boarders wake." With nowhere else to turn, Penelope found herself standing in the dusty street outside the boarding house as the sun rose, clutching her small bundle of clothes, tears streaming down her face. She had exactly $2 to her name, hardly enough to secure other lodgings or passage anywhere else. "Miss Morgan." She turned to find Yates approaching, leading his horse. "I heard what happened," he said, his expression grim. "Mrs. Miller made quite a scene this morning, telling everyone about your disgraceful behavior." Fresh tears welled in Penelope's eyes. "I have nowhere to go." "Yes, you do," Yates said firmly. "My uncle's ranch is about 5 miles outside town. There's a small cabin I've been fixing up for myself and a main house where my aunt could use some help." "I couldn't impose." "It's not imposing if you're earning your keep," he interrupted. "And my aunt, unlike your aunt, doesn't believe reading is a cardinal sin." He offered his hand. "What do you say? It's not Boston, but it's a roof over your head." Penelope hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "Thank you," she whispered. Yates helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her. As they rode through St. Louis and out into the rolling countryside beyond, Penelope felt a strange mixture of terror and hope. She was once again starting over, cast out by family, but this time she wasn't alone. The Atwood Ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a main house. Barn, stables, and several outbuildings spread across acres of gentle hills. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and a small orchard stood behind the house. The cabin Yates had mentioned was set a little apart from the main house, overlooking a creek. Vernon and Emma Atwood welcomed Penelope with kindness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Any friend of Yates is welcome here," Emma said, showing her to a small but comfortable room in the main house. "And I could certainly use help with the cooking and mending." "Martha Miller is a hard woman," Vernon commented over dinner that night. "Always was, even as a girl." "Don't you worry about her, Miss Morgan. You're safe here. And you can read all you want," Emma added with a warm smile. "We've got a fair collection ourselves, and Vernon rides into town for newspapers and books whenever he can." That night, Penelope slept better than she had in months, wrapped in clean sheets that smelled of sunshine, with the quiet sounds of the countryside lulling her to sleep. The next morning, after breakfast, Yates asked Penelope to join him at his cabin. "I want to show you something," he said. The cabin was still a work in progress, one large room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a sleeping loft above. Simple but solidly built, with windows that caught the morning light. "It's lovely," Penelope said sincerely. "It's missing something," Yates replied, leading her to the wall opposite the fireplace. "This is where I thought they should go." Bookshelves," he explained, gesturing to a pile of lumber in the corner. "Every home needs bookshelves. I've been collecting the wood but haven't had time to build them yet. Penelope's heart swelled with emotion. You really love books too. They've been my companions on many a lonely night on the trail, he admitted. And now, he hesitated, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. I want to help you get your books back from Martha. She'll never give them up, Penelope said sadly. We won't ask, Yates replied with a determined glint in his eye. Consider it a rescue mission. 2 days later, Yates rode into town with a plan. While Martha was occupied with the weekly church social, he and Penelope would retrieve her trunk of books from Martha's room. It was risky, but with Sarah's promised help she'd been sympathetic to Penelope's plight they had a chance. Are you sure about this? Penelope asked as they approached the boarding house from the back alley. If we're caught, then I'll deal with the consequences, Yates assured her. Books that important are worth fighting for. Sarah was waiting at the back door as planned. Mrs. Miller left for church 10 minutes ago, she whispered. Her room's unlocked. She never imagines anyone would dare enter. Thank you, Sarah, Penelope hugged the girl. I wish I could take you with me. Maybe someday, Sarah smiled sadly. Now hurry. Penelope led Yates upstairs to Martha's room, where they found her trunk of books pushed into a corner, untouched. Together they carried it down the back stairs and loaded it onto Yates's wagon, covered with a tarp. Goodbye, Sarah. Penelope embraced her friend once more. And thank you. They were halfway back to the ranch when Penelope's tensions finally released in a burst of laughter. I can't believe we did that. I believe the legal term is reclaiming stolen property, Yates grinned. But I admit, I haven't felt this alive since my last cattle rustler chase. Is that what I am now? A book rustler, she teased. The most dangerous kind, he replied with a wink. Over the next weeks, as September gave way to October's golden light, Penelope settled into life at the Atwood Ranch. She helped Emma with household duties, learned to make preserves from the last of the season's fruit, and even tried her hand at riding under Yates's patient instruction. Every evening, she would read aloud from one of her rescued books as Emma mended clothes and Vernon whittled by the fire. Sometimes Yates joined them. Other times he worked late on his cabin, which was nearing completion. One crisp October afternoon, Yates found Penelope in the orchard, collecting the last of the apples. I have something to show you, he said, his expression both nervous and excited. He led her to his cabin, now finished with a proper roof, glazed windows, and a stone path leading to the door. Inside, the floors were polished, the fireplace ready for winter, simple but sturdy furniture arranged comfortably. It's wonderful, she said sincerely. You've worked so hard. Look there, he pointed to the wall opposite the fireplace. Penelope gasped. Where before there had been bare logs, now stood floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, beautifully crafted with smooth planed pine, the shelves spaced perfectly to accommodate books of various sizes. You built these, she whispered, running her fingers along the polished wood. For your books, Yates confirmed, watching her face. And any others we might collect. Penelope turned to him, heart pounding. Yates took a deep breath, taking her hands in his. Penelope, I've known many women in my travels, but never one who made me want to stop wandering. Never one whose mind and spirit called to me like yours. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as he continued. I'm not a wealthy man, and this cabin is humble compared to what you knew in Boston. But it's yours if you want it, if you want me. Are you asking me to marry you? She whispered. I'm asking you to build a life with me, he replied earnestly. A life where you never have to hide your love of books or apologize for your brilliant mind. Where we can read by the fire in winter and under the stars in summer. He gestured to the empty shelves. I built these for you, Penelope. I want you to keep reading, to fill our home with stories and poems and all the words that make your eyes light up. Penelope felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. No man had ever truly seen her the way Yates did. No one had ever cherished the very things about her that others had condemned. "Yes," she said through tears of joy. "Yes to all of it." Yates pulled her into his arms, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded with equal passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penelope Morgan, books and all. And I love you, Yates Atwood, for loving all of me." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Vernon officiating and Emma beaming through happy tears. Sarah, who had finally gathered the courage to leave the boarding house, stood as Penelope's witness, a new life as Emma's helper ahead of her. Martha Miller sent word through town gossip that Penelope was dead to her family, news that stung but no longer had the power to devastate. Penelope had found a new family, one that celebrated rather than condemned her passions. Their first night in the cabin, with a fire crackling and her books proudly displayed on Yates's shelves, Penelope knew she had finally found home. As they lay in the bed they now shared, she traced the strong lines of her husband's face. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That sometimes the best stories aren't in books after all," she replied, kissing him softly. Winter descended on Missouri with icy winds and blankets of snow. But inside the cabin, all was warmth and contentment. Penelope discovered talents she never knew she possessed, making bread that rose perfectly, preserving meat for the cold months, even helping with the livestock when necessary. In the evenings, she and Yates would read together by the fire, sometimes aloud, sometimes side by side in comfortable silence. He introduced her to Whitman and Thoreau. She shared her beloved Austen and Bronte with him. "Did you ever imagine marrying a cowboy?" he asked one night as they prepared for bed. "Never," she admitted with a laugh. In Boston, cowboys were characters in dime novels, not flesh and blood men who build bookshelves. "And did you ever imagine marrying a woman who was sent away for loving books too much?" she countered. "I always hoped to find a woman with fire in her spirit," he said, drawing her close. "I just never expected to find one with an entire library in her soul." When spring came, bringing new life to the land, it brought news of another beginning. Penelope was expecting a child. "A baby," Yates whispered in wonder, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our child will have stories from the very start. And bookshelves waiting," Penelope added with a smile. As her body changed with the growing child, Penelope began writing down the stories of her journey from Boston society to frontier wife. She filled pages with her reflections on love, independence, and finding strength in unexpected places. "What will you do with these?" Yates asked, finding her writing one afternoon. "Maybe nothing," she replied. "Or maybe someday I'll try to publish them. A book for other women who feel trapped by society's expectations." "I think you should," he encouraged. "Your words deserve to be shared." In November 1877, their son was born, William Vernon Atwood, named for the poet Wordsworth and Yates's uncle, who had welcomed Penelope so warmly. As she held her newborn, Penelope marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just over a year. "He has your eyes," Yates said softly, sitting beside them on the bed, "and hopefully your love of stories." "And your strength," Penelope added, "your kindness." As William grew from infant to toddler, the cabin expanded with him, Yates adding a small bedroom, more bookshelves, a wider porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Penelope planted a garden, filling it with herbs and flowers she remembered from her mother's garden in Boston. One spring morning in 1879, as she watched 2-year-old William helping Yates repair a fence, a rider approached the cabin. Penelope shaded her eyes, surprised to recognize the messenger from town. "Letter for you, Mrs. Atwood," the young man said, handing her an envelope with a Boston postmark. Her hands trembled as she opened it, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. "Penelope," the letter began stiffly, "it has come to my attention that you have married and started a family in Missouri. Your stepmother has passed away last winter, and in my solitude, I have had cause to reflect on my actions toward you. While I still believe books are a frivolous pastime for a young woman, I regret the harshness with which I sent you away. If you are amenable, I would like to meet my grandchild. Yours, Edward Morgan." Yates found her on the porch, tears streaming down her face, the letter clutched in her hand. "Bad news?" he asked, instantly concerned. "My father wants to visit," she said, her voice a mixture of emotions. "He says he regrets how he treated me." Yates sat beside her, taking her hand. "What do you want to do?" Penelope thought for a long moment. "I want him to see the life I've built, the happiness I've found, not out of spite but because. Maybe he needs to understand that there are many ways for a woman to live a meaningful life." "Then write to him," Yates said simply. "Invite him to meet his grandson and his book-loving, cabin-dwelling, frontier woman-daughter." Edward Morgan arrived in August, clearly uncomfortable in the rustic surroundings of the ranch. He was thinner than Penelope remembered, his hair fully gray now, his posture less commanding. "Father," she greeted him at the station, William hiding shyly behind her skirts. "Penelope," he replied stiffly, then his expression softened as he looked at his grandson. "And this must be William." The first days of his visit were awkward, Edward clearly shocked by the simplicity of their life. The manual work his daughter cheerfully undertook, the way she and Yates shared responsibilities, unlike the rigid gender roles of Boston society. "You truly live like this?" he asked on the third evening, watching Penelope mend Yates's shirt while discussing a passage from Emerson with him. "Happily," she confirmed. "I have work that matters, a husband who respects my mind as well as my heart, and the freedom to read as much as I wish." "And these books," Edward gestured to the shelves that now lined nearly every wall of the expanded cabin. "They're important to both of you. Yates built those shelves for me before we were married," Penelope explained, "when I had nothing but a trunk of books rescued from Aunt Martha's. He gave me a place for them and for myself when no one else would." Later, Penelope overheard her father speaking to Yates by the corral. "You've given her an unusual life," Edward said, watching William toddle after a chicken. "I'd say she's built it herself with my support," Yates replied. "Penelope isn't a woman who needs to be given anything, just the freedom to choose her own path." Before Edward left to return to Boston, he surprised Penelope with a gift, a first edition of Little Women that had belonged to her mother. "She would have approved of your choices," he said gruffly. "She was a reader too. I was too blind to see that the trait I found so frustrating in you was one I had loved in her." "Thank you, Father," Penelope whispered, holding the book to her chest. "I won't pretend to understand the life you've chosen," Edward added. "But it's clear you've found happiness here, and William is thriving. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning of healing, a bridge across the chasm that had separated them." After her father's visit, Penelope began writing in earnest, not just her personal reflections, but stories of frontier women, articles about the importance of education for girls, even children's tales for William. Yates encouraged her to send her work to publishers, and to her surprise, a magazine in St. Louis accepted one of her essays. "The Freedom to Read, A Frontier Woman's Perspective by Penelope Morgan Atwood," Yates read proudly from the published page. "The first of many, I predict." "Perhaps," she smiled, "but nothing compares to the story we're living." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Clara, joined them in 1881, followed by twins James and Elizabeth in 1884. The cabin expanded again and again, evolving into a proper house with rooms for each child and bookshelves in every one. Penelope's writing gained recognition beyond Missouri. Her collection of frontier women's stories was published in 1886, and her children's books, illustrated by a talented artist in St. Louis, became popular throughout the Midwest. In 1890, as they celebrated the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Yates surprised her with a larger press than the small one she'd been using to print pamphlets on women's education. "For your newspaper," he explained, showing her the equipment set up in what had been a storage shed, now converted to a proper office. "My newspaper," she repeated, stunned. "You've been talking about starting one for women in the territory," he reminded her. About sharing ideas, creating community through words. Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "You remembered." "I always listen when you talk about your dreams," Yates said simply. "That's what partners do." The Frontier Woman's Journal published its first issue in January 1891, with articles on everything from practical advice for homesteading to arguments for women's suffrage. What began as Penelope's personal project grew to include contributions from women throughout the territory and beyond. On summer evenings, the extended family would gather on the wide porch of what was now known as the Book Ranch. Vernon and Emma, now in their 70s but still spry. Sarah, who had married the local schoolteacher, and the 4 Atwood children, all avid readers like their parents. "Tell us how you and Papa met," Clara would often request, though she'd heard the story countless times. "Well," Penelope would begin, leaning against Yates's shoulder, "I was sent away for loving books too much." And Yates would continue, and I built her shelves and said, "Keep reading." By 1900, as a new century dawned, the world had changed dramatically. The frontier was closing, railroads crisscrossed the nation, and Penelope's newspaper had evolved into a respected publication with subscribers across America. William, at 23, was studying law in St. Louis, while Clara showed signs of following her mother into journalism. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Penelope to the spot by the creek where he had first proposed. "Would you do it again?" he asked, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes as bright as ever. "Choose this life with me, 1,000 times over," she replied without hesitation. "Every page of our story has been worth reading, even the difficult chapters." He pressed, thinking of the years of hard work, the 2 children they had lost to fever in 1888, the financial struggles when drought had threatened the ranch. "Especially those," Penelope said softly. "They gave depth to the happier times." That's what makes a story worth telling, the full range of human experience. In 1913, when Penelope was 59 and Yates 64, her autobiography was published to critical acclaim, Books and Boundaries. A Frontier Woman's Journey told the story of a Boston society girl cast out for her love of reading who found purpose and passion on the Missouri frontier. "Your words will inspire generations of girls to follow their own paths," Yates said proudly at the publication party held in their home, now a gathering place for writers, thinkers, and change-makers from across the country. "Our story will," Penelope corrected, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I would have had no story to tell without you." In the twilight of their lives, as grandchildren played among the bookshelves that had witnessed the whole of their journey together, Penelope and Yates would often sit on their porch, reading side by side just as they had in those early days. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in the garden at Martha's?" Penelope asked one evening as the sun set over land that had nourished them for over 4 decades. "That books don't ruin people, they save them," Yates recalled. "You saved me too," she said softly. "No," he disagreed, pressing a kiss to her hand. "You saved yourself. I just built the shelves." Penelope Morgan Atwood lived to see women gain the right to vote, her newspaper evolve into a respected national publication, and her grandchildren develop their own passions for words and ideas. When she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1928, at the age of 74, her library contained over 3,000 volumes, each one a testament to a life lived fully and freely. Yeats followed her 6 months later. Their children found him in his favorite chair by the fire, a book of Penelope's essays open on his lap, a peaceful smile on his face. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple headstone that read, "Here lie Penelope and Yeats Atwood, who found in each other the greatest story ever told." And on Penelope's side, the words she had chosen years before. She was sent away for loving books too much. He built her shelves and said, "Keep reading." The Book Ranch still stands today, now a library and historical site where visitors can learn about the remarkable woman who turned exile into opportunity, and the cowboy who loved her mind as much as her heart. Among the thousands of volumes that line its walls, Penelope's own works hold a special place, testaments to a time when loving books could be considered a woman's greatest failing, and finding someone who cherished that love could be her greatest triumph. Each year, on the anniversary of their wedding, local schoolchildren gather to hear their story and receive a book of their own, a tradition started by the Atwood children to honor parents who believed that words had the power to change lives, and love had the power to change the world. For in the end, it was both books and love that wrote the story of Penelope and Yeats, a story that, like all the best ones, continues to be told, inspiring new generations to follow their passions and build shelves for each other's dreams.